Does the increase in avocado production affect the quality of avocados in the United States?
Well, part of the problem with the increased demand for avocados in general is that avocados actually used to be primarily an American crop, particularly from Southern California, the San Diego region. With the advent of the demand for avocado, Mexican avocado growers really took over the industry. And they could undercut price and production. And a lot of the American avocado growers, and I actually have several as patients, have found it incredibly hard to compete for price and actual quality. Most people don't realize there is a difference in quality between avocados, the way they're raised, the way they're grown. And the other thing, the drought in Southern California over the last 10 years or so has made it very difficult to grow avocados successfully. So American growers have really been pushed out of the market.
Do you think the quality of avocados in the United States has deteriorated in the last year?
Yeah, the quality has definitely gone down. Many people who shop at farmers markets like I do have noticed that our local avocado crops have been really severely impacted, even in size and quality. So yeah, it's gone down.
Is there a way to know when avocados are good quality?
Not so much by examining the avocado. What I do is try to find out who the grower is. Go to a farmer's market, talk to the farmer. It's a much better way of knowing where your avocado came from and how it was raised.
Do you think it's better to buy your avocado at a farmer's market than a grocery store?
Yeah, at all times, if you can get to a farmer's market, please support your farmer's markets. They're usually local. Most of them use local products that they've either grown or they know who grew it. And you're just safer that way.
Why do you think eggs are so expensive now?
Well, we have a horrible epidemic of bird flu in this country and other countries. And sadly, farmers are being made to literally kill off all of their flock if one bird is infected, because it can ravage not only their particular hen house, but a hen house adjacent. So really the main determinant in the prices of eggs right now is the fact that we have so few egg-laying hens to produce these eggs, and it's simply a law of supply and demand.
Why do grocery stores in the United States refrigerate their eggs when other countries don't?
Yeah, one of the things that's fascinating shopping in Italy and France is that eggs are on the store shelves. They're not refrigerated at all. In America, they are kept refrigerated because, quite frankly, the level of bacterial contamination in our eggs in the United States is vastly higher than in Europe. That's because in the United States, we're allowed to keep hens in huge warehouses, still declare them to be cage-free or free-range, and this promotes bacterial populations that contaminate the eggs. So you'll notice in restaurant menus, for instance, in the United States, warning, eating raw or undercooked food, including eggs, is dangerous. You'll never see a warning like that in Europe about eggs because they're completely different in terms of their bacterial load.
When do you think the United States started playing with the quality of eggs?
Well, we have to remember, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska in the 50s and 60s, and most egg production was done from family farms, and chickens were actually a part of being a farm animal. And chickens were actually raised to go out in the fields where cows were grazing, and they're insectivores. They eat bugs. And they would actually go out to the manure, the cow pies, and they'd scratch through the manure looking for the bugs. In the process of scratching through the manure, they spread the manure. They then came back to the hen house at night and laid eggs. The chickens were much too valuable as farm animals to actually eat them. So they produced eggs based on what they ate. And of course, back then, these eggs had the yolk had an incredible, orange, intense color, which is very rare to find anymore. And interestingly enough, you rarely had fried chicken. You only had a stewed chicken when the old hen couldn't lay anymore, that she was so tough that you had to cook her all day or even overnight to tenderize the meat. And only on a special occasion, when somebody really important was visiting, would you ever think of making a fried chicken from a young bird, because they're much too valuable as farm animals. Now they're a commodity. They're not a working farm animal anymore. They're just popping out eggs.
How different is the color of egg yolks now?
Yeah, most of the darkness and the color of the yolk comes from the beta carotene in what the chicken is eating. Now, you can fool people and add beta carotene to a hen's diet, and that's what's mostly done now. But it's amazing eating in little cafes in Italy or the south of France and getting one of these yolks. It's just intensely orange because these birds are out eating what they were supposed to eat, and that's bugs and grass. American oaks, I hope people notice, are incredibly dull in color because they really don't have these intense vitamins and flavonoids and polyphenols that were present in traditional eggs. Again and again, tell my patients, you are what you eat, that's true, but you are what the thing you're eating ate. And I'll tell you an interesting story that just happened. There's an amazing chicken farmer in Texas by the name of Farmer Dan. And Farmer Dan raises lectin-light chicken. Pastured chicken, his feed that he gives them are completely lectin-free. He started a business in eggs because people want chickens, eggs that are not fed lectins. And he's been so successful that he unfortunately runs out of eggs all the time. One of my patients who lives in Texas wanted to get Farmer Dan's eggs. And Farmer Dan said, well, I'm sorry, I don't have any for you, but do the next best thing. Get some pastured eggs and try those. This guy found some pastured eggs from another farmer, and he immediately reacted to them. He actually felt very ill. And he went back to Farmer Dan and said, you know, pasture didn't work. I went to the guy's website and found out what he was feeding his chickens. And he was feeding peanut meal. He was feeding up ground catfish meal. And catfish are fed corn and another grain and corn. And he wasn't feeding them wheat, he wasn't feeding them soy, but he was feeding them lectin-rich foods. So Farmer Dan, actually wrote me. He said, I felt so sorry for the guy. He said, here's a dozen eggs. Let's do the experiment. See if you react to these. The guy was perfect. And so Farmer Dan wrote me. He says, I believe you, I believe what you say, but this is the perfect example that even though this guy was eating pasture-raised eggs, the chickens were being fed crap. And he reacted to it like you'd expect. So you are what you eat, but you are what the thing you're eating ate or was fed.
What do cage-free eggs mean?
So cage-free means absolutely nothing. You can keep 100,000 chickens in a warehouse, have them abut themselves to hold themselves up. They're not in a cage, but they're cage-free.
What do free-range eggs mean?
Free-range, the law defining what a free-range chicken is, was passed in 2007. It was signed into law by President Bush, Georgia congressman from a chicken-growing district. And the law says you can keep 100,000 chickens in a warehouse. You can open a door to the outside to a 3-yard by 3-yard patch of dirt or grass for 5 minutes every 24 hours. And the chicken has the potential to go outside. That's the definition of a free-range chicken. Now, it gets even better. Organic chicken has to be fed organic corn and soybeans. So an organic free-range chicken, if the price of organic feed doubles above conventional feed, in the process of raising that chicken, you can convert back to conventional feed and still label it organic because you meant well.
What labels should we look for on our eggs?
Well, again, if at all possible, buy your eggs from a farmer's market because the farmer is usually there. A few years ago, I was lecturing in Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to the farmer's market while I had a free time. And I walked up to a lady who was selling her eggs. And my first question is always, what do you feed your chickens? And she said, I don't feed them anything. They work for me. And I said, oh, I like you. There's a lady in the farmer's market in Santa Barbara who I did the same thing. And I said, what do you feed your chickens? She said, I don't feed them anything. They work for me. She said, you should come back in the fall when I turn them loose in the pomegranate orchard. And all they basically eat is the pomegranates that drop. She said, you want to see an orange-colored yolk? You come back to the fall. And sure enough, the most intense orange color was in those eggs. If you're looking for the perfect egg, make sure you go to the farmer's market and ask them what they feed their chickens.
Where did the classic American breakfast idea of bacon and eggs come from?
Interestingly enough, the expression eating high on the hog actually came from eating the most fatty cuts of the hog. In fact, most people don't know that Cincinnati was the major site for hog killing, and it was very expensive to, for instance, take corn to market. What farmers in the Midwest did was they fed their pigs corn, and they drove their pigs to Cincinnati. So the expression in the Midwest was you carried corn to market in the form of a hog. So it became actually a very cheap food source for the grain products that were grown. And that's actually where pork and bacon came from originally.
Dr. Gundry, what do you think of cereal for breakfast?
Well, so remember that cereal didn't exist in its current form until the Kellogg's brothers in the Adventist Sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan, were trying to get a way for their sanitarium patients to eat grain products. And quite frankly, their patients didn't like grain products. So one of their neighbors, C.W. Post of Post fame, Post Toasties, showed them that if they cooked down wheat into a mash and then added sugar to it and then dried it in the form of a flake, that their patients would eat it. In fact, they did. And Kellogg's Corn Flakes, which was the first of their products, was actually advertised as the world's first pre-digested food. Now, that was in 1906. We fast forward over 100 years now, we're so concerned about processed and ultra-processed foods as part of our diet. The first ultra-processed food was Kellogg's Corn Flakes.
Where did the saying, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, come from?
Yeah, it was actually from Kellogg's Corn Flakes Company. That line was created by the Kellogg's Corn Flakes Company to sell what otherwise would have been a typical American breakfast of eggs and bacon or eggs and steak or eggs and sausage to a convenience food. And the whole purpose of this was to convince people that a pre-digested food was much easier on your stomach. The digestion of food took huge amounts of energy. And so, miracle of miracles, you could have a pre-digested food that would give you instant energy. The connection with cereal and bananas as a typical American breakfast is even more intriguing and interesting. The United Fruit Company, which is the creator of the Chiquita banana, had discovered that bananas could be picked green and then shipped across the country in rail cars and then ripened at their destination by exposure to a gas called ethylene oxide. And to get Americans to think of bananas as a food worthy of eating, they paid doctors to tell people, number one, that bananas were a rich source of potassium, which they're not. But they told doctors to say that the perfect meal to start your day was a bowl of Kellogg's Corn Flakes with a sliced Chiquita banana. And they went so far as to put a coupon for a bunch of Chiquita bananas in every box of Kellogg's Corn Flakes. And that's how it got started.
Why did breakfast sandwiches become so popular?
Anytime somebody can walk away with something in their hand rather than sitting down to a bowl of something or a plate of something in a busy society usually wins. And so taking traditional American breakfast, whether it's an egg and bacon or whether it's bacon, eggs, and toast, or a bowl of cereal, and put it in a form that is portable, makes incredible economic sense for a company that wants to sell its products.
Is the USDA food pyramid a myth?
The Department of Agriculture is in charge of the USDA food pyramid. Now, if you think about it, the Department of Agriculture's job is to sell agricultural products. It's not to tell people what's good for them or bad for them. And so naturally, the USDA food pyramid promotes agricultural products. In fact, the original food pyramid was you were supposed to have 7 servings a day of grain products. Now, if you think about that for a second, if you wanted a really good way to promote obesity in this country, having 11 servings of grain products a day is a really good way to make somebody fat.
What would a typical day following the USDA food pyramid look like?
One piece of bread, whether it's whole wheat, whether it's white, whether it's sourdough, has 4 teaspoons of sugar. In fact, white bread has the highest glycemic index of any food ever studied. That's where 100 was set. Give you an example, an actual teaspoon of table sugar has a glycemic index of about 75. So if you want to shoot your blood sugar up, bread is one of the best ways to do it. So just imagine, let's just say all you're going to eat is bread. That means you're going to have 11 slices of bread per day. Multiply that by 4 teaspoons of sugar. That's 44 teaspoons of sugar per day. And quite frankly, most people would probably rather have 44 teaspoons of sugar than 11 slices of bread. And that's what they actually want you to think is a good for you proportion of these foods.
Do you know any homemade remedies for dark spots in the skin?
Well, a lot of people use bleaches as a treatment for dark spots. But the problem is bleaches are caustic and they actually promote more damage to the skin. And skin damage in itself can produce dark spots. So the home remedies, unfortunately, usually make things worse rather than better.
What's the first thing a person should do if they want to avoid dark spots?
Well, we have to understand that dark spots are actually from the formation of what are called advanced glycation end products, nicknamed AGEs. That's where the word age spot came from. Advanced glycation end products are formed from the combination of sugar in our diet, protein in our diet, and the heat of our bodies. And it produces a chemical reaction called the Maillard reaction, like a duck, spelled different. It produces one of the strongest chemical bonds there is. We have sugar in our diet, we have protein in our diet, and we have heat. So 24 hours a day, we produce these advanced glycation end products. And here's a fun fact. On TV every night, you see, I got my A1C down. A1C is a marker for advanced glycation end products attached to our red blood cells. Red blood cells actually last in our circulation about 2 months before we grind them up. So we use that to track the amount of sugar and the amount of protein that people are handling. So when you have a high A1C, you have high advanced glycation end products, and isn't it wonder that age spots appear on our skin?